All right, greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Bears Gym for a little Bible study today. We are in the book of Genesis, and we're having a nice, long, in-depth study through the first book of the Bible. From in the beginning, and we've made it as far as Abraham and Sarai, or rather he's Abram at this point. He's soon to be Abraham. And then we have Sarai, and she's soon to be Sarah. We're picking up in chapter 15 today. We left off last time talking a little bit about Melchizedek and how it was that Abraham and his armed servants, his slaves, went after the kings that attacked Sodom and Gomorrah and their associated kings. But what really got Abraham upset was that they kidnapped his nephew Lot. And so he went and ensued in battle, and the Lord gave him a great victory. Today we have a little bit of doubting in Abraham's mind of whom his heir is going to be, of his name, and God's going to kind of step in and wake him up a little bit and make a covenant with him, something they did way back in the old days. We don't do this type of covenant anymore. We just basically say we do, or we sign on a contract. And anyway, we're going to get right into this here, and you'll see the contract is a little bit unusual in our perspective, but in that day and age, they didn't have as much paper and pens and lawyers and judges and courtroom appeals and so forth. They just basically they made a covenant, they shook hands, they made a promise, they made a vow, and that was binding in those days. And today we're going to see a very unusual covenant that God makes with Abraham. So with that, enough said, let's move on to Genesis 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eleazar of Damascus. He was concerned that one of his servants, or his head slaves, was going to be the heir of his little kingdom. And Abraham said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. None. I have no heir, none born in my house, and only a servant or slaves born in my home are going to inherit my vast riches that you've blessed me with. And God's about to straighten them out here. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. It is always the hope of a father to spend his anywhere from 16 to 20 years raising his daughter or his son, and that one day the father can bestow his kingdom or his household goods or his name upon the daughter and her husband, the son and his wife, and then knowing that when he dies it'll all pass on into their generations, and then his name will be carried on. That's kind of a goal, or at least a legitimate goal of most fathers that have walked this earth, that their that their lineage will be passed on to the next generation. Verse 5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. In other words, Abraham, you're very old. You don't have any of your own kids. Rest easy. One day, your children will fill the earth and will be as numerous as the stars. And I don't know how Abraham could think about that, really, and like grasp it, because he had no kids. And it's something that's very hard to grasp, is the promises of God. And you say to yourself, I've waited a long time. But you know what? To God, 1,000 years is like one day. All right, he's been forever. He's eternal. And so rest easy, be patient, and one day his promises will come true in your life. If you are his child and you are submitted to his mercies in Jesus Christ, his promises will be fulfilled in your life on this earth unto eternity. And sometimes those promises mean hardship. Perhaps some of you thought I was about to talk about you're going to get rich here on this earth. Well, very few will. Okay? But we're not here to reap up riches here on this earth. We are here to serve the Master. Everything we have is his, and basically everything he's created is his, and he gave it to mankind for a time, but eventually all things will be submitted back to Jesus Christ and then unto the Father in the end, because this is all his. So talking about getting rich here on this earth and living like a king is a little bit foolish. When we look at the lives of the disciples, the sufferings of Jesus Christ, there are some on earth that do live a good life, a blessed life. God has blessed them. Abraham lived that life. Unfortunately, us in the New Testament, that's unfortunate or that's good. We don't have to have animal sacrifices. And actually our standard is a little bit higher. You know, our it goes more to just deeds in the Old Testament, your deeds. And the New Testament, the bar seems to be raised where it goes a little bit deeper. If you even look on a woman, you've committed adultery with her if you lust after her. And in the Old Testament, it was pretty much rules, regulations, at least seemingly, but it was also to be mixed with faith. And so they had the animal sacrifices, and they had this very steeped tradition of rituals that they performed, the animal sacrifices, as I said. They had certain covenants they had to do. And we're about to see one that's kind of interesting here. And but what's nice in the New Testament, we inherit the promises of Jesus Christ that were talked about way back in Genesis. And we inherit it simply by calling out to Jesus Christ and asking for forgiveness and turning to him, putting our faith and our trust in him and following him. And we become his worshipers. And when we do that, we do inherit riches, heavenly riches, and we inherit many, many brothers and sisters in the Lord here spread all over the earth of every race, creed, and color. But we also inherit fire, and fire is trouble. And the longer you walk in the Lord, you will find that the trouble escalates, but also the peace escalates. You learn to deal with that. You learn to deal with troubles, and you just keep moving on. And as you do that, you grow in maturity and faith and grace and love and peace. And that's kind of the Christian life. And then one day we spend eternity with the Lord, because That's what he wants for us, to spend eternity with him. Now, I got off of the beaten track a little bit, and you'll forgive me for that, and I do that. But this book, man, this book is so deep, it's kind of hard not to get off the beaten track because there's just so many good things to talk about. Anyway, let me get back on track here, forgive me. And we're going to get back to Abraham. And we're going to pick up in verse 6. And it says, if you remember I said, they had all these rites and rituals, but there was also faith involved. In verse 6, after God showed him the stars and said, look, if you can count them, then you could count how many offspring you're going to have that are passed down through the generations that bear your name. Verse 6, and he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. To be a believer in God is just that simple. You see the promises of God, that he's with you, and you believe in him, and God establishes that as righteousness as we put our faith in Jesus Christ. And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee the land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? You know, the people, they got to argue, hold a dissertation of, well, why? How is this going to happen? And he did the same thing. We all do it. Why? Every single man, woman, and child on this earth has asked God, why? How come? Why couldn't? Why? That's like an oxymoron that shouldn't be asked to God, but we do it. Why? It's like, well, you couldn't understand if he told you, but we ask it, okay? And so Abraham asked the same question. In verse 9, he said unto him, take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Okay, so he gave him the menu of these little animals, and then he's going to tell him to do something a little bit strange to us, but in that day it was an ordained covenant that they had. And he took unto him all these and divided them in the midst. So he cut them in half. Don't be grossed out. That's just the way it is. It's like when you go to the butcher shop and you see all the meat in a case. This happened. It's just you didn't see it. Okay, so bear with us here. He divided them in the midst and laid each piece one against another, but the birds divided he not. The birds are so small. You get a big butcher knife or a big saw blade knife, and they're like, they're flying in various pieces. So he just kind of set them to the side. But the larger animals, they were kind of cut into and laid like that. Verse 11. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abraham drove them away. And that's a very symbolic of the struggle to fight for your faith in Jesus Christ. Don't let the vultures come and steal your covenant with the Lord for a cheap thrill, a moment of having friends, or a cheap pleasure. Fight for your faith and stand strong. Drive away the demons and the vultures. And when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, an horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and thou shalt be buried in a good old age. Very interesting. God tells us to do something. I hope I don't get off on a beaten track. I probably will. I'll use an example here. God tells a missionary to go off into a foreign land, or maybe to another city. That missionary or evangelist or preacher or layperson, whoever that person is, married couple, man, woman, whoever, when they get there, they expect to see things happening. And they expect the things to be all just prepared for them and good. But you know what? Sometimes there's a long wait before you begin to see God's work materialize. And sometimes you start going all kinds of different directions, and they all start bloop, 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 slowly disintegrating, collapsing, turning into dust. We see that here. He expects God to come down immediately and, flame the animals here, or whatever they would expect. The missionaries, they go over in the foreign lands, and they don't see action. They experience hardship, sometimes death. Their little kids die of diseases or are killed by, tribes people, hatcheted down because of their faith, because their parents were missionaries, Christians. They themselves, their kids were killed. And many become shipwrecked, and they come home devastated. Now, I don't judge them, people. My heart goes out to them because sometimes, and that doesn't mean they were in the wrong place. It just means things got very hard. And I don't judge them. If they came off the mission field shipwrecked, then it was time for them to come off the mission field and have a little time to gather their family and to gather their strength back up. It doesn't mean that it was a failure just because they just couldn't do it no more. It just means their ministry was done. And it was hard. Yes, it is hard, and very much Abraham here. He probably expected God to, as soon as he sliced the babies and put them aside, that he was expecting God to come down and flame them. And he didn't. He had to drive the vultures away. Eventually, he fell asleep. The long day had passed. And then, when the day had passed, that's when God showed up. Very interesting. He showed up in a very interesting fashion. And it's hard to say. A great darkness fell upon him. During this time also, God tells him a little bit about where his descendants are going to go. There's a little hint. And that they were going to be slaves for about 400 years. And they were. Abraham didn't really get to see it, but later on, they were transported off to Egypt because of a famine. And eventually they wind up being slaves there. And then they go out, and they go out with many riches. Anyway, let's, while I'm got back onto the track here, let's stay on the track. But in the fourth generation they shall come hither again, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. A smoking furnace. Kind of hard for us to imagine. If you've ever worked in a foundry, you can probably imagine it a little better. You know these little cauldrons that are heated either with electricity or with gas, and that day would have been heated with, wood or oil or something, or tar. But in this, it was a supernatural furnace, something way more special than a foundry furnace. But not just a smoking furnace, but also a burning lamp. A lamp is a good thing in Christianity. As a servant of God, A lamp means that God is with you. A burning lamp that is like a testimony as He's in your midst. That's a good thing. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Rephaims and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites. Well, if you had any problems in your town of naming new streets, dude, come right here. There's some snappy new names that nobody else has duplicated in the United States. And, nobody will forget these streets. Anyway, a little humor there. Bears can be funny. We can be humorous. Not often, but we can. Anyway, God bless you guys. We did pretty good. That's a short little chapter in Genesis. And hope you learn a little something. You always learn a little something when you open up the Bible and study with a clean heart and an open heart, willing to be changed. You'll always learn something. And with that, God bless you from the Bears Gym. See you later, folks.